Hello again, and thanks for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, the Alaska Weather Programming Notice for KTOO 360 TV North, and that's the show Monday evening, tomorrow, May 8th. Alaska Weather Show will air late on KTOO 360 TV North due to late coverage of the Alaska legislature. Anyway, it'll show after the legislature finishes up. And next up, river breakup map. Yukon River, still mostly ice here, except a little bit of some open area there just near and west of Tanana, there where it meets the Tanana River and the Yukon meet there at Tanana. Otherwise, rivers up here to the north and northwest, Koyukuk, Kobuk, and Noatak River is still pretty solid frozen, as well as the North Slope rivers, of course. And then expanding areas here of some open areas on the Susitna and Little Susitna rivers, Copper River Basin, Copper River. Of course, the upper reaches here of the, or the eastern area of the Tanana River, and all the way down to Tanana now, or all the way down to Nenana on the Tanana River, there's some open areas. And today the tripod finally fell. It was still up this morning at about 9-10 a.m. and then here this shot later in the afternoon, earlier in the afternoon, about 2 p.m. showed that it has tipped over finally. So winners, go collect your winnings. And from there, satellite imagery showing weak trough here just south of the Kenai Peninsula area with moisture in across southern and south central Alaska here. A little bit of moisture over to the east and down to the south there. Just some shower activity associated with this. Otherwise dry to the east, up to the interior, pretty dry with some sunshine. A little bit of moisture here over toward the border, but nothing significant. Temperatures rising in the mid to upper 50s, near 60 this afternoon, at mid-afternoon over the eastern interior, especially over toward Eagle and those locations. Cooler out here to the west and dry, and some sunshine as well over much of the western interior. Kind of an area high pressure in that location ahead of this system. Moving eastward, large low out here toward the western Aleutian Center. It looks like almost on top of Shimia. And you can see not really moving all that fast, kind of just shifting eastward here. Looks like a little wave trying to develop there west of Unalaska, right on top of Unmak Island. And gusty winds and rain for the Pribilofs today, on down to the eastern Aleutians. That's spreading into the Alaska Peninsula. But rainfall amounts not all that heavy, as pretty much were they not heavy here with this system as well. Kodiak Island had about 1/100 of an inch in the last 12 hours, a little bit more up in towards southern Cook Inlet areas, but basically dry Bristol Bay on up to the north. Some clouds here over the western Arctic coast that are, get that rolling again, kind of streaming in from the west there in a little more westerly flow. Could be a few flurries with that, but nothing, again, significant. Basically dry up here across all of the interior, northern interior. May get a few showers developing over the Brooks Range here the next few hours with that area of cloudiness there southwest of Arctic Village. Otherwise, not much going on over the interior. A little warmer in the east, cooler in the west, about sums it up. And Panhandle here, not pretty dry as well. Maybe a few showers down here to the south. There's a weak band of moisture associated with a low south of the Queen Charlotte's kind of spun up in there. But again, nothing significant. Mostly dry day, variably cloudy skies. Kind of mostly cloudy for the southeast coast as it was here for southern Alaska. Kind of some hazy sunshine in areas. But generally mostly cloudy, a few isolated showers along the North Gulf Coast, down into northern Kodiak Island, Fognak Island, and into southern Cook Inlet. Then some isolated rain and snow showers along the Alaska Range today, down into the Talkeetnas, maybe the Wrangles area, and isolated showers really haven't formed yet here over the eastern interior. They may over the next few hours. Basically dry to the west with a lot of sunshine here from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta right on up the Yukon River Valley into the Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley, Seward Peninsula, mostly sunny, and northern areas of the upper Yukon Valley as well. Dry, light winds over the Arctic coast and North Slope with varying amounts of clouds there. And then this large low back over the southwest Bering Sea And westerly flow, kind of gusty winds, mostly south of the Aleutians there. The strongest winds are back over towards Chimianatu because he gusts about 40 miles an hour today. And winds gusting up to 46 miles an hour, peak wind gusts at St. Paul earlier today as that front approaches with rain there all the way down into the eastern Aleutians. And you can see the tightening gradient there shifting eastward in toward the Alaska Peninsula with some rain and snow pushing in along with it. But northern Bering Sea dry with light winds. And for tonight, that continues to slide eastward here. The low tracks to just southwest of the Pribilof Islands and weakens a little bit. Gusty northwest winds, 25 to 45 miles an hour back here from Amchitka Island west to Chimianatu. Widespread area of showers and lighter west-southwesterlies here on up to the Alaska Peninsula. Behind the front, gusty winds. Ahead of the front with rain and snow depending on elevation for Bristol Bay into the Aleutian Range, starting to push into southern Shelikof Strait and southwestern Kodiak Island. Otherwise, that weak trough here keeping a chance of moisture along the North Gulf Coast, but whatever falls will be quite light, generally keeping skies mostly cloudy. Isolated showers possible here along the Alaska Range on up into the eastern interior. Again, nothing significant with that either, and a risk of a shower or two over the northern panhandle. Otherwise, mostly clear, not much change. High pressure holds over the north slope there with light winds all the way down into the Yukon Delta. Kuskokwim Delta starting to see a little bit of an increase in the winds, a little bit there, along with the Kuskokwim Delta coastline as well. Staying dry over the central, or most of the panhandle staying dry throughout the night tonight. And that'll last into tomorrow as well. Partly sunny conditions there for the southeast coast with light winds, high pressure ridged up right along the coastline there. Still a chance of a shower or two for the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area, as well as much of the North Gulf Coast, kind of some leftover moisture. And again, mostly cloudy skies, afternoon showers, remnants of that trough lifts on up into the southeast interior, keeping it a little unsettled, but no significant precipitation expected in these areas, especially even up into the eastern interior there. No precipitation back to the west. That'll be your best chance of seeing any sunshine tomorrow. Northern Kuskokwim Valley, lower Yukon River Valley, and on up Seward Peninsula looking really good. Actually, probably St. Matthew Lawrence Island as well, up into the Kobuk Valley, Kotzebue, Selawik, northwest coast looking good. Light winds and variably cloudy skies again for the north slope, which means some areas could break out into some sunshine during the afternoon. And gusty winds, rain, Kodiak Island, rain or snow in the higher elevations of Bristol Bay here. And some of that slipping on up into the Kuskokwim Delta now, and then coming back in toward the Pribilof Islands, still a chance of probably rain or rain and snow mixed at the coldest. And then showers tapering off, ending there around Atka Island, so about Adak westward. Dry conditions for the Aleutians and low weakening here as it pulls eastward slowly. And we'll see for the day on Tuesday, that front pushes mainly off to the east there. And the low center tracks off to the southeast as well. So that's leaving Bering Sea pretty much high and dry here with light northeast winds. Pretty dry. You can see a lot of clear skies and VFR flying into the St. Lawrence Island area and still continuing here over the northwest. In fact, much of the interior will be dry. Chance of showers along the North Gulf Coast. Cloudy skies there. Lesser of a chance of showers over Bristol Bay with partly to mostly cloudy skies. Should see a significant amount of sun over much of interior Alaska from maybe the northern Susitna Valley all the way up to the North Slope, maybe the Arctic coast. And partly mostly sunny for the southeast coast with mild temperatures into the 50s. And for the overnight lows tonight, they're upper 30s to near 40 there for the southeast coast. Otherwise, 20s and 30s, mostly in the 30s, except for the colder areas of the Copper River Basin, Kuskokwim Valley areas, but into the 30s here. Kodiak Island to Talkeetna. Highs tomorrow, upper 40s to lower 50s. In fact, Anchorage today, probably at the airport officially, may hit the first 50-degree temperature this year, which has occurred. That's the latest occurrence of 50 degrees since 1973, May 7th, if it strikes today. Otherwise, 45 to 50 out to the west, lower 40s Bristol Bay, lower 50s, 50, 55 for the Copper River Basin and Panhandle, up and lows 40s most everywhere, upper 30s, lower 40s, and now highs near 50, most areas, a little cooler out along the coast, but just about everywhere pushing up near or into the 50s. Up to the north, upper 20s to the mid-30s for the lows, teens for the Arctic coast and Seward Peninsula highs. Lower to mid-50s east, cooler out to the west and to the north, and lows, lower 30s. Still a lot of areas dropping below freezing, especially the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, followed by highs. Again, 50s, mid to upper maybe for the eastern areas, and chillier out toward the Seward Peninsula and Bering Strait. 30s for the Aleutians tonight.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. We've got a band of IFR here that front moving across the Bering Sea with the main push off to the east and a lot slower push up to the north here. So right into the Alaska Peninsula, central Aleutian, some more IFR, and VFR, western interior, and marginal VFR, North Slope Arctic coast to start the day Monday, and then some IFR up here along the Alaska Range. Marginal VFR down into Cook Inlet and Kamishak, Kachemak Bays. Barren Islands there, mostly VFR for Kodiak Island back into Bristol Bay. IFR there for the eastern and central North Gulf Coast, actually into Prince William Sound. The usual spot there, east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and marginal VFR areas of the southeast coast. For the afternoon, VFR for the inside waters of the Panhandle, except Lincoln Glacier Bay, marginal VFR along the coast. Band of IFR here, right along the North Gulf Coast, back into Prince William Sound, eastern southern Kenai Peninsula. A heavier area of IFR now along and just east of Kodiak Island. Improving here along the Alaska Range. Good VFR, most of interior Alaska, all the way up to the North Slope there. The Brooks Range, North Slope marginal, then out along the Arctic coast, IFR for the afternoon. Not too bad through the Bering Strait and the northern Bering Sea here. Big area of IFR, southeast Bering Sea, right into Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, Cape Newenham, down to the eastern Aleutians. And for Tuesday morning, IFR here up along the Arctic coast and into the eastern North Slope, actually into the Brooks Range there, and then some marginal VFR a little to the south of that. Otherwise, the interior staying mostly nice. VFR, maybe some IFR along the western Alaska Range on the eastern slopes of the range there. Just a narrow band, just a chance, and possible marginal VFR here over the northern Copper River Basin. Definitely looks IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Not too bad for the Panhandle, marginal along the coast. And this area a little bit farther to the southeast, or actually a little smaller, mostly staying in place there with some breaks out over the Aleutians and along the southwest coast. And for the afternoon, IFR into Prince William Sound, stays nice over the Panhandle. And again, an area of IFR here, southeast Bering Sea, mostly off the coast though, down to the eastern Aleutians, and some IFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Excuse me. And for the interior, marginal VFR, some possible IFR on the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Passes Anaktuvuk, looking good tomorrow. VFR for both Anaktuvuk and Adigan in the Brooks Range. Lake Clark and Merrill, mostly marginal VFR for those passes. And then for rainy, marginal VFR. Windy, though, looks to be VFR. VFR also for, VFR also for Isabel and Mentasta VFR, and even Tanita VFR. Flying there. Portage, though, lower conditions, especially on the eastern entrance. Likely to see some IFR at times for the day Monday. And for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. And for the freezing levels, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 feet here into the central interior. 2,000 feet, nudging up toward the Alaska Peninsula area. Otherwise, about 2,000 to 3,000 feet for the Panhandle as well. And at the surface, a little farther to the north now, well, somewhat, still down around Nunivak Island, but eastern interior all the way up to the Brooks Range. And for the icing threat with southeast flow, the front coming eastward, southeast flow increasing, so possible considerable moderate rime icing around the Kodiak Island area to the Aleutian Range, otherwise light to isolated moderate rime icing here into Bristol Bay and maybe the southern Kuskokwim Delta. and possibly for south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, maybe the Susitna Valley. Jet stream west-southwest 85 knots here across southern Alaska. Stronger jet out here to the west. Northwesterlies there for the Aleutians up to 130 knots. 9,000 feet easterlies here coming around this low center just north of False Pass there. 50 knots out of the southeast, turn northeast 40 to 45 knots. And at 3,000 feet, light winds for the Panhandle, interior Alaska, right through here. That's where all the winds are, up to 55 knots. And with that, look for moderate turbulence here, south central Alaska, Kodiak Island, the southwest interior, as well as the central and west central Aleutians.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with. You know. Possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which
you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy, and it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines, and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecasts here. For the south coast, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. For the north coast, or central coast here, westerlies pretty light at 10 knots, and then the north coast, east to south at 15 to 20 knots. Northern inner channels, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, south winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Stevens Passage, northwest winds or southeast winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Clarence Strait, northwesterlies 10 knots, seas 2 feet. And for the day, see a pickup in the winds here with system coming in from the west, south to southeast at 25 knots for the south coast, north coast, southeast 25 knots, and Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, all looking at a southeast wind about 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Clarence Strait, southeast 20, seas 4 feet. Prince William Sound, southeast at 15 tomorrow with 2-foot seas. Eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast 15, 4-foot seas. West or east at 25 for the western North Gulf Coast. And we've got some gale warnings out for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, southeast winds 35 knots. Seas a little over 10 feet. Cook Inlet, northeast 15 to 20. And then swell craft advisories for Cook Inlet on Tuesday for northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, sea 7 to 9 feet. Gale warnings continue for Kamishak Bay, northeast at 35. Also some easterly gales for the Barren Islands, east at 35 knots there. And for the North Gulf Coast, east winds 30 to 35 knots, strongest on the eastern North Gulf Coast, and east to 25 with seas 5 feet for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And gale warnings for Bristol Bay, east winds 35 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, southwest 15. And for the day on Tuesday, for the Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, seas running 3 to 5 feet. And Kodiak Island, east-northeast at 30 knots with 8 to 10-foot seas. Bristol Bay, lighter winds for Tuesday, northeast 15. And then for the day on Monday for the eastern Aleutians, southwest 15 to 20 knots there for the Fox Islands, seas up to 8 feet. And northwest 25 to 30 knots for Adak and Atka, northwest 30 knots for Shimei and Kiska, and then north to northwest 25 to 30 knots from Kiska to Shimei. And for the day on Tuesday, kind of variable winds, 30 knots over the western Aleutians, depending on what side of the island chain you're on here. Southwest 25 there from Kiska to Adak. Then north to northeast at 25 knots for the central Aleutians. And the eastern areas, north to northeast, 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, northeast winds 30 knots, 20 to 30 knots, with the 20-knot winds along the Yukon Delta coast. Northeast 30 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, northeast 30 for the Pribilofs, northeast 30 St. Matthew Island, and northeast at 20 for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And for the day on Tuesday, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, all north at 20 knots. And the Pribilof small craft advisories northwesterlies at 30 knots with 10-foot seas, and small craft advisories there for the Kuskokwim Delta coast for north winds 25 knots, seas at about 3 feet. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, north winds 15 to 20 knots. Otherwise, pretty light and more variable, but basically out of the east for the western Arctic coast at 5 to 10 knots, light winds at 5 knots for the central coast, and then east at about 10 for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for Tuesday, light winds continue out of the east for the east side there, 5 to 10, and north to northeast at 10 knots for the central and western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea. A little bit more of a breeze there out of the north at 15 to 20 knots. And for tonight, I'd say it's pretty nice and dry here. Northern Bering Sea, western interior. Not too bad over the eastern and southeast interior as well. Just maybe a few isolated showers along this trough axis. Better chance, but still nothing significant for the North Gulf Coast. Next front bringing wind and rain up, sliding up the Alaska Peninsula, spilling into Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island late tonight. Dry for the Panhandle with some sunshine tomorrow. Rain and clouds spreading into becoming thicker here over Cook Inlet, south central Alaska. Still a chance of showers. And then the next day, unsettled North Gulf Coast, dry elsewhere. Next system bringing rain in out west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.